My name is Andrew. I am a rancher, a marksman, an outdoorsman, and a bladesmith. I've spent most of my life seeking adventure in one way or another, or in one place or another, and I would like to share all of that with you. How's it going, guys? Thank you for tuning in to my YouTube series where I'm going to go over all the things that I really wish I had known when I first started making knives. Not only could I have saved a lot of time, but I could have saved a lot of money if I had just found a centralized location that actually had all of these bits of information. You certainly won't learn everything that you need to know here, but I intend to make sure you learn most of it. On the first episode, we're going to be going over fire and steel. First of all, when it comes to fire, there's pretty much two options that you have here, and that's going to be your run-of-the-mill. We started with wood, keep it going with coal, and heat it up with air. So usually what people will do is they will create a fire, typically a bundle of coals, and they force air into it really fast, which heats up those coals even more than is normal if it was just burning by itself. And that's going to heat your steel up to forging temperatures or heat treating temperature. The option that I chose when I first started this process was the cheaper one because I wasn't sure if I was really going to be into this or not. So this option is great if all you're going to be doing is heat treating your knife and you don't plan on forging it. Unfortunately, this won't be getting things hot enough to forge with unless you're really trying, and I sort of prefer a little bit more powerful of an option than this. But what I did is I went to the hardware store and I purchased a few fire bricks like this. Took a masonry bit and drilled a hole in a couple of them. This is only an example model for you. And what I did is I took a few of these MAP gas canisters with one of these on the end. So what's cool about these is they have a lock on them, which allows you to keep your fire burning even without touching it. So I got about 3 of these and put them through each of the holes here. And then you can leave them as long as you have them precariously placed. And then you have yourself a hot environment that you can heat treat and maybe forge out of. Like I said, if all you're going to be doing is heat treating your knife and you're looking for a budget option, you can get that done easily for about $50-$60. Maybe if you want to try a little bit harder, you could spend $120. But for just a little bit more, you can get something with a lot more power, a lot more heat, and it's much more reliable and frankly safer than this option. And I'll go and show you that now. It's outside. Since I started, I've actually upgraded to a larger forge, propane powered. It's the Hell's Forge, and you can find this on Amazon for just a couple $100. It really actually gives you a much more powerful option. It really heats up your metal a lot faster and allows you to do a more precise job. So with this, all you do is you hook it up and you turn on your propane, and then you take your torch, which you already had, light it up, give it a couple of minutes, gets real hot. The single burner Hell's Forge that I have actually ended up being a really good beginner option for me. It allowed me to heat my metal up accurately enough and hot enough to forge with, as opposed to using the MAP gas canisters, which unfortunately didn't really get my metal hot enough to forge with. And I had to stick to using the stock removal method, which is something we're going to get into a little bit later in this series. But for now, what you need to know is you can certainly heat treat the metal with a MAP gas canister, but you're not quite going to get things hot enough to forge with. This is a high quality chef knife that I ordered off of the internet. This knife was approximately $85. As you can see, this knife bend in a circle. The next thing we're going to learn in this series is how to select the appropriate steel for making your knife. If you select the appropriate steel and you heat treat it correctly, not only will this not happen, but it will be worth more than $85. So, what do you do when you're trying to pick steel for your first knife? Well, I would say that you want it to be simple. You want it to be able to harden enough in order to retain an edge, and strong enough in order to withstand the project or purpose that you're designing the knife for. When it comes to selecting a steel for your first knife, there's really only one question you need to ask in the beginning, and that's, what am I going to use this knife for? For the purpose of this course, I'm going to be using an all-around, easy to work with steel. It has good edge retention and it has good strength. So it's a nice in-the-middle steel that not only withstands a lot and is quite versatile, but it's easy to work with. So we don't have to get too complex with our heat treating process, and we don't need to buy any specialty tools in order to do this. We can do it in our backyard for really cheap, and there's a lot of margin for error. If for some reason you have a piece of steel at home and you really want to make something out of it, you have to find out, first of all, if you can even harden that steel. So there's a lot of things you might have at home. You could have something like an old circular saw blade. This one is actually not an old one, and this steel is not hardenable. But if you find yourself a good old rusty circular saw blade, it rusts, and that means that it is quite likely that you have yourself a piece of carbon steel, and we can test that really easily to see if it's hardenable, and I'll show you how. You may have also purchased a piece of Damascus like this on the internet. Usually if you've done that, they'll tell you exactly what kind of steel is in there, and you can find heat treating parameters from that seller. Another option, and this is one of my favorite things to do, is just buy a good old piece of flat stock like this. I usually like to get them just shy of a 1/4 inch thick, gives me some room to forge it to shape. Or if I don't feel like forging, I can do what's called the stock removal method, which once again we'll get into in a later video. This piece of steel is what's called 1084 carbon steel. So that number corresponds to the carbon content in this steel, and this particular type of carbon steel is very easy to heat treat at your home. You don't need a computer to do it. You don't need a fancy oven. All you need is fire and a magnet.
So what we're going to do right here is test a few pieces of metal. So what's going to happen here, if you look at this first item here, we have a railroad spike. So I'm going to take it to the grinder belt here, and if you look at the sparks coming off of here, there's a few sparks. It's not that many at all. So actually what that tells us is that the carbon content in this is low. What I have next here is a piece of a leaf spring that I cut off a semi-truck. So we're going to take that to the grinder belt, and as you can see, there are a lot more sparks coming from this. This is a hardenable piece of steel with a higher carbon content. It's actually likely 1095 steel. This is 1084 steel right here. So that I would expect to be hardenable, but let's go ahead and give it a double check here. And as you can see, we have quite a bit of sparks coming off of that. Last piece is this one right here. We got an L-cut piece of steel right here. Not sure what it is, but let's check it out. And as you can see, there are like no sparks coming off of that one. That's not hardenable.
Now that we know what each of these steels are capable of, we can make our decision on what we're actually going to make our knife out of. Again, for the purpose of this training, I'm going to be using 1084 steel. And a few episodes down the road, I'm going to show you exactly how to heat treat that in order to make it a really strong, versatile bushcraft or camp knife. There is one type of steel that I would like to warn you all about, but also advocate for at the same time. If you go to your local hardware store, there's usually a welding section, and you're going to find a lot of strips of steel like this. You know, it's going to be flat stock, and it looks like it's perfect for knife making. Well, that's what they call mild steel. So there is not enough carbon content in that steel to be hardenable, meaning you might be able to put somewhat of an edge on it, but it's not going to retain it, and it's going to end up doing this, just like this knife right here, or it could break, dent. It's not going to maintain its shape. It's completely useless as far as a knife goes, unless you're making a butter knife. But, so I have a piece of it right here, and actually I use this just for warming up my quenching, which we'll get to in a later episode. But what I did when I first wanted to start learning is I knew I didn't want to spend all of my money on all of this expensive steel and make shitty knives. So what I did is I bought a whole bunch of mild steel, and I made 10 knives out of mild steel just to practice the shaping process. And yeah, I messed around with heat treating it, and yeah, it does get a little bit harder, but it's not a knife. And I still have all of those knives, but they're completely useless. What they are, though, are cheap ways of teaching yourself. So you have the opportunity to fail several times. And this might be important if you have a piece of, say, like, oh, how about a railroad spike that you know is a carbon steel, or some good spring steel from some leaf springs from your dad's old truck, and you don't want to waste it. Maybe you only got one shot with it, and you don't know what you're doing. So the best thing to do is take yourself some mild steel, which you can pick up for a couple of bucks, and practice just a couple of times before you start. That's what I did. And that might be for you, or you might be overly confident and ready to go. It's your choice. If you're interested in seeing more, or if you'd like to see the knives that I've made, maybe it'll help with my reputation a little bit. What you can do is follow my Instagram, adventure_tactics with an X. It's the same as the name on my YouTube account. Please remember to like, follow, subscribe, and all that stuff that you're apparently supposed to do on the internet. And I'll see you on the next episode.